Hello, Ron, and welcome back to our second set of presentation today. Today we have Filip Tvrdý, who's giving us the talk, The Alleged Rationality of Conspiratorial Thinking. Filip, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, and I'm very glad that you have me. So the name of my presentation is The Alleged Rationality of Conspiratorial Thinking, but I will also talk about conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists and their alleged rationality. You should know upfront that I'm going to talk mainly about unwarranted or unjustified conspiracy theories. I will give you just two examples. The first one is QAnon. I don't want to talk about that. You know probably more about the stuff than I do. But here in the Czech Republic, we have something very similar. We have a lot of COVID-19 conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists. And as you can see in these two images, there are some visual similarities between QAnon and our scene in the Czech Republic. You can see national flags and the use of megaphones and the resistance against face masks. So on the right side of my presentation, there's a former member of our Czech parliament, Lubomír Volný, who really thinks that COVID-19 doesn't exist, or that it was spread by world elites, for example, Bill Gates or George Soros and others, and that the vaccination doesn't work, and maybe it's a weapon of mass destruction or something like that. So unwarranted conspiracy theories, this is what I'm going to talk about. But my main question is, can we say that conspiracy theories are rational? Can we say sometimes that unwarranted conspiracy theories are rational? And can you say the same thing about conspiracy theorists and conspiratorial thinking? I think that there are a lot of philosophers, maybe some of them are present, who think so. I want to talk about it. My presentation is quite simple outline. It has four parts. In the first one, I'm going to talk about rationality and irrationality because I think that there are some deep terminological problems with both of these. Then I'm going to move to Brian Kaplan's account of rational irrationality. And then I'm going to give you some examples about rational irrationality in the case of conspiracy theories. And in the end, just very shortly, I want to present my quite radical deflationary account of rationality, because I have some, I think maybe that we shouldn't use the term rationality at all because it's too vague and too problematic. I'm going to get to that later. So let me start with these terms themselves, rationality and irrationality. I think that there are at least two quite difficult questions that concern rationality and irrationality. And the first one is, which subjects may be candidates for the predicate rational? I really think that this term rational is too vague because we can apply it on almost everything. I will give you some examples. We can talk about rational beliefs, rational hypotheses, or rational theories, arguments, processes, about rational decisions, about rational thinking, actions, agents, and maybe even institutions. If we have a term that is as vague and as wide as this one, it might be a problem. I also think that we can maybe use better predicates or better adjectives when we talk about these kind of candidates that are more simple and that we can use more properly. For example, we can talk about true beliefs or justified beliefs. We can talk about verified hypotheses, coherent theories, sound arguments, maybe reliable processes, warranted decisions, and so on and so on. Logical thinking, correct action, intelligent agent, time-tested institutions. These might be maybe better terms than to use the term rational for all of these candidates. So that's my first point. And the second question that is connected to the main terminological topic is that there's a difference between theoretical and practical rationality. This difference has been present in philosophy since ancient Greece, I guess, because we can talk with Aristotle about the difference between theoretike and praktike episteme. We can talk with Kant about the difference between theoretische and praktische Vernunft. And today it is quite common among philosophers to use the terms epistemic and instrumental rationality. I'm not sure where these two terms, epistemic and instrumental rationality, come from, but they are used very often and very widely. Well, let me talk about these. I think that you somehow intuitively understand what is the difference between epistemic and instrumental rationality. I will give you my quite simple, I hope non-problematic definition. Epistemic rationality is an ability to achieve justified and true beliefs based on correct inference and reliable evidence. The point is that when we use the term epistemic rationality, we usually deal with intersubjective knowledge. Yeah, so it's a intersubjective term that you use about knowledge. There's also another tradition of talking about rationality, and we can say that it is instrumental rationality, which is, according to me, an ability to act in accordance with one's own interests that are based on preferred objectives and appropriate means. I think that it's quite clear that when we use the term instrumental rationality, intersubjective knowledge is not what we are interested in. Usually, we will deal with subjective decision-making because we speak about one's own interests and about subjective preferences, subjective objectives, and stuff like that. So I think that this difference between epistemic and instrumental rationality is very important in discussion about conspiracy theories too. Philosophers do not deal with instrumental rationality a lot. I think that the situation has changed a bit recently, but still there are some philosophers who were interested in instrumental rationality a lot. And one example is David Hume, who in the first half of the 18th century wrote in his treatise quite famous passage that I'm going to quote. Reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions and can never pretend to any other office than to serve and obey them. There's another more radical passage that I'm going to quote too. Hume also wrote, "It is not contrary to reason to prefer the destruction of the whole world to the scratching of my finger." We can see here that Hume's approach is quite subjective because our own preferences are in contrast with preferences of the whole world. But still, we can think of the usage of rationality here in this instrumental way. There's some thinkers in the 20th century who were sympathetic with Hume's approach. I will give you just one example, and it is cognitive scientist, or maybe political scientist, or maybe economist, Herbert Simon, who in his Reason in Human Affairs in 1983 wrote, "We see that reason is wholly instrumental. It cannot tell us where to go. At best, it can tell us how to get there. It is a gun for hire that can be employed in the service of whatever goals we have, good or bad." I would say that this approach to rationality, this instrumental approach, wasn't very popular among philosophers till very recently, but this approach is very common in the science of economics, because in economics, a rational agent simply satisfies the Bayesian probability axioms, whereas an irrational one does not comply with them. So the difference between rational and irrational agents is in satisfaction the Bayesian probability axioms. And this definition comes from Brian Kaplan. I'm going to talk about him more later, so I think this is a good starting point. So rational agent is that one who satisfies the rational expectations assumption, and the irrational agent deviates from rational expectations assumption, which might sound a bit obscure if you are not, if you do not understand modern economics. But to put it simply, I would say that rational agent is that one who has sufficient knowledge and comes to optimal decisions. In case when they have sufficient knowledge, they are able to come to optimal decisions. And this is probably everything we can say about rationality in the area or in the field of economics. Well, I think that the division between epistemic and instrumental rationality opened doors to discussion about rational irrationality, and it really happened thanks mainly to Brian Kaplan, who in the years 2000 and 2001 published two highly influential papers on rational irrationality. The first one is called Rational Irrationality, a Framework for the Neoclassical Behavioral Debate. And the second one is Rational Ignorance versus Rational Irrationality. But probably the most simple explanation of what rational irrationality is, we can find in his influential book, The Myth of the Rational Voter, Why Democracies Choose Bad Policies, from 2006. Kaplan explained what he meant by rational irrationality. According to him, this term explains why people hold systematically biased, low information, high certitude beliefs. In other words, why they deviate from the rational expectations assumption. And I think that unwarranted conspiracy theories are a great example of these systematically biased, low information, but high certitude beliefs. And this is why we can apply probably rational irrationality on conspiracy theories. And Brian Kaplan did so in some of his writings. According to Kaplan, we must understand that irrational beliefs might be highly attractive, at least for some of us. Agents, according to Kaplan, try to reach a compromise between irrationality and profit. Let me quote some passages from his writings. According to Kaplan, agents optimize by trading wealth for irrationality, or we can say that agents trade off utility from beliefs against utility from states of affairs, or they prefer their own preferences over beliefs. According to Kaplan, rational irrationality must be cheap, which means that an agent prefers irrational beliefs, according to Kaplan, these bliss beliefs, because it does not have any or almost any negative consequences. Agents can be irrational if it's cheap, if it doesn't have any negative consequences. I created this very simple demand curve. In this diagram, in this graph, you can see that the demand of irrational beliefs rises, the quantity rises with fall in price. If the irrational belief is cheap, it might be very attractive for an agent to accept one. Yeah. In other cases, irrational beliefs are not only attractive, but they can be lucrative. Rational irrationality may be lucrative, because even the most unreasonable and bizarre beliefs make profit under specific conditions. And there are some other factors that promote rational irrationality. Let me give you just two examples. The first factor might be conformity, which is succumbing to social pressure. For example, doubting biological evolution is highly irrational from the epistemic point of view, but it may increase one's status in a particular religious community, fundamental religious community. Or another example, accepting climate denialism may accelerate one's career in a particular political party. I believe that you can find out your own examples of political parties like these. Another factor might be positive illusions, for example, optimism bias. Optimism bias is the difference between imagined expectations and real outcomes in life, business, or marriage. And we all believe or accept positive illusions like these, and it might be rational even in cases when these illusions are irrational themselves, because in case when I know that probably 50% of all marriages in the Czech Republic end in divorce, I must have some positive illusion that in my case, my marriage will end great. But these positive illusions sometimes may be, I would say, they can play a negative role in our lives, because imagine a situation that optimism bias, this illusion, plays in healthcare, crime, or gambling. If I am too optimistic about a career in crime or about career in gambling, it might have negative consequences for my everyday life. But you can see in these examples that rational irrationality is quite common, and it might be useful from the instrumental point of view for agents who believe in them. But to put it in a more philosophical way, I could say, and I must say that Brian Kaplan doesn't use this terminology because probably he doesn't know about its existence. I can say that a rational agent is rational from an instrumental point of view, but irrational from an epistemic point of view. These two kinds of rationality might be in conflict. And this leads, in some cases, to some quite horrible consequences, I'm afraid. Brian Kaplan understands the trouble because he wrote, an agent who is rational in this weak instrumental sense could be grossly and systematically mistaken about the world is actually. And this is quite, as I said, terrible conclusion, because it means then we can call as rational agents who are deeply irrational from the epistemic point of view. Some philosophers, and this is the topic I'm going to talk in my next slides, some philosophers, and again, some of them are probably present, consider even conspiracy theories, conspiracy theorists, or conspiratorial thinking to be rational, which is quite counterintuitive, at least for me, because I could probably say that even members of the Flat Earth Society are rational, for example, from the instrumental point of view, because, as we could have seen is in this great documentary on Netflix, Behind the Curve, some of them find their happiness in that society because they are more attractive for, I don't know, for the potential partners. They find friends in societies like these. They find fame, maybe money in endeavor like this. I want to talk about this in the next section. So let's talk about conspiracy theories. There are at least two approaches how to say that conspiracy theories, conspiracy theorists, or conspiratorial thinking are rational. The first approach is present in writings of David Cody and Charles Pigden and many others. And it is the statement that conspiracy theorists themselves might be considered rational. You can see the names of these two papers. The first one, Cody, is called Are Conspiracy Theories Irrational? And the answer is no, they might be rational. And the other one is Pigden's Are Conspiracy Theories Epistemically vicious? The answer is again, they are not. They might be epistemically virtuous. The argument goes like this, and you probably know it well. According to Pigden, Cody, and many others, there have been many well-documented conspiracies in the past. Therefore, it is rational to be a conspiracy theorist. It means someone who inquires a possibility of secret conspiracies. On the contrary, according to Cody, Pigden, and others, it is irrational to universally denounce conspiracy theories. This is typical for coincidence theorists or for those who suffer from conspiracy theory phobia. These terms come from Cody and Reka and Bayesian. So this is first approach, how to talk about rationality of conspiracy theorists. Let me give you another example of another approach. Neil Levy, in his paper Is Conspiracy Theorizing Irrational from 2019, wrote that conspiratorial thinking itself might be rational. Let me explain again. Levy distinguished between objective and subjective rationality. And I think that the distinction is exactly the same as between epistemic and instrumental rationality. You know, epistemic rationality is about objective or intersubjective knowledge, and instrumental rationality is all about subjective decisions, something like that. According to Levy, objectively irrational agents may be subjectively rational. Using Kaplan's terminology, a lot of agents might be rationally irrational. They participate on rational irrationality or something like that. The reason for Levy is that irrational conspiracy theories usually result from rational psychological dispositions. For example, caution or mistrust or vigilance and stuff like that. These adaptive mechanisms function as a defense, according to Levy, against danger. These are, for example, false positives in snake detection. It is better to be conspiratorial about possible snakes in your environment than to be lazy in the detection. And the same mechanisms function as a defense against exploitation. The example might be false positives in fraud detection. Again, it's better for an agent to be vigilant and to see fraud even in cases where there is no fraud, because it brings some advantage to agents like these. And because almost all agents are insufficiently informed, these insufficiently informed agents benefit from conspiratorial thinking, and it is therefore rational to engage in it. Well, these are two approaches, how to say that conspiracy theories, conspiracy theorists, or conspiratorial thinking itself might be rational. Let me get to criticism of these approaches. I would say that I'm quite strongly against rational irrationality, and I will give you at least 3 reasons why not to deal with rational irrationality at all, and maybe why the term rationality itself is problematic. The first reason is priority of epistemic rationality. I think that epistemic rationality, if we use this terminology, is a prerequisite for instrumental rationality, because it determines goals of one agency. Well, I'm not sure if anyone today is a proponent of Hume's sentimentalism. I think that almost all philosophers think that at least sometimes our goals might be determined by reason. I believe that epistemically irrational goals may be achieved by instrumental irrational means, which might be the problem, but we cannot reckon the resulting behavior as rational only. I'll give you one example about crime. Imagine a situation when a husband starts to believe that his wife is unfaithful to him, and he decides to murder her. Even in case when he does it in a very clever way and he is not persecuted by police and others. I wouldn't say that his behavior or his choice was rational. I wouldn't say that he is a rational agent, because the goal was determined irrationally from the viewpoint of epistemic rationality. So I have quite trouble to say that I have trouble saying that people might be instrumentally rational even in cases when they are epistemically rational. I wouldn't say that they are rational at all. The second reason is maybe more problematic, and it's a social nature of rationality. I again think that rationality is a normative concept. It's not very problematic. I think that first part of this argument, ascribing instrumental rationality from the viewpoint of subjective norms does not make much sense. I cannot say that something is objectively irrational, but subjectively rational. I would feel very uncomfortable using language like this, because I think that rationality is more of a group than individual matter. It is the same situation as truth, justification, and reliability. If you have a look at this cartoon, you understand why it's funny. I cannot say, I swear to tell my own truth. And I believe I also cannot say, I'm going to use my own rationality. Rationality is a normative concept that is ascribed from a viewpoint of some larger group, I believe. And I also think that individualistic epistemology of rationality that uses terms like instrumental or subjective rationality really leads to subjectivism and relativism. And this is the scenario a lot of us would like to avoid. My last argument against the term rational irrationality is based on the evolution of conspiratorial thinking. I think that Levy does not understand probably how evolution of conspiratorial thinking happened. I'm sorry to say that. I would say that conspiratorial ideation is a kind of evolutionary older heuristics, which means that heuristics of type 1 could have been considered rational before the emergence of analytic thinking of type 2. But at present, type 2 processes have epistemic priority over type 1 intuitions. I will give you an example from cognitive science of religion, from contemporary cognitive science of religion. There is a theory of something called hyperactive agency detective device, HADD, that results in false positives when we detect agency or intentions in our environments. Again, I understand that it was rational, sorry for the term, from the evolutionary point of view to have something like hyperactive agency detection device. It's very useful in snake detection or something like that, or predator detection. But this device, this mental module, this mental gadget also leads to belief in fairies and spirits and other imaginary entities like these. To use that rational irrational terminology again, I would really not feel comfortable saying that someone who sees fairies in his or her garden is a rational agent. I understand why we might say that the module itself, from the evolutionary point of view, might have been rational, but today to speak about agents with fairies in their gardens as rational agents is quite problematic. Let me sum my criticism of rational irrationality up. I would say that conspiracy theories may be based on both justified and unjustified beliefs, which means that I'm kind of particularist in my understanding of conspiracy theories. But I will also say that there are a lot of unjustified conspiracy theories, and that these are boundary cases of irrationality. There is nothing rational about them. There's nothing rational about QAnon. There is nothing rational about belief that COVID-19 was invented by Bill Gates and serves as a weapon of mass destruction. I think that unjustified conspiracy theories are results of epistemic defects or epistemic vices, maybe. And in my approach, these two defects are cognitive laziness and metacognitive overconfidence. Cognitive laziness is a lack of analytical thinking, and metacognitive overconfidence is something like the knowledge illusion. I understand that this deficit model must also take into consideration agent motivation, their moral character, and the relevant social context, but still there is something hardwired in intellectual character or epistemic character of believers in conspiracy theories. It is misleading and disparaging to use the term rational in relation to sets of unjustified beliefs that are based on conspiratorial intuitions. It is misleading and disparaging to talk about believers in unjustified conspiracy theories as rational, and about conspiracy theories themselves, unjustified conspiracy theories themselves, as rational, even in this weak sense. And my presentation will end in quite radical slide, because I think that if philosophers cannot make their terminology clear, it might be better to exclude rationality completely from the epistemological discourse. I'm not sure if we should use the term rational or irrational when we talk about conspiracy theories or anything else, because it's not very fruitful and it's not very clear to use the term. Let me move to my last slide. I would like to promote deflationary account of rationality. As I mentioned before, do not use the term if you do not know how to use it properly. I'm quite happy that I am not alone in my radical account of rationality, because I have found this passage in writings of Alvin Goldman in the first part of his book Epistemology and Cognition from 1986. Goldman wrote, and let me quote the whole passage: "I will not attempt to analyze or specify standards for all terms of epistemic evaluation. The salient omission here is rationality, which has figured prominently in epistemology. This notion is so vague in ordinary usage and so disparately employed by different philosophers and social scientists that it has limited usefulness. In portions of the book, I will address and criticize other people's discussions of rationality, but I will not try to provide a positive account of my own." And I'll say that this is exactly my position. I would rather lose the term rationality than to use it incorrectly. I think that the normative term, or these normative terms of rationality and irrationality, play the same role as expletives for agreement and disagreement. When we say that someone is rational, we usually mean that we agree with them, that they are nice guys. When I say that some conspiracy theory is rational, it means that me too believe in it. And if I say that someone is irrational agent, that he believes in an irrational theory, it just means that I don't like him or her. I don't like them. I disagree with them. And it serves like patting on one's shoulders sometimes when you say that someone's irrational, or as a way how to express our disagreement. And I also think that it is maybe more honest to use other terms like crazy and bizarre than to use this vague and not very correctly constructed term irrational. Well, that's my point. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip, for a great talk. We have a question already from Martin. I do believe it might be beneficial to harbour some false beliefs for social reasons, but there seems to be a performative paradox in calling this rational. Once you start thinking about the expedient of your own beliefs, you have thereby extinguished your belief. Belief is involuntary. Isn't that a more fundamental problem with the whole notion of rational misbeliefs?
Well, thank you for the question, Martin. I hope that I explained or answered your question in the end of my presentation. I really think that there is something more problematic with the whole concept, with the whole conception of rationality. And I also think that beliefs are involuntary. This is the reason why I don't want to talk about epistemic vices, because I believe that epistemic vices have some kind of desert. It means that they have some voluntary part, and we can blame epistemic agents that believe in them, but this is not the case. This is the reason why I would prefer the term epistemic defects. Epistemic agents who believe in false theories or unwarranted, for example, conspiracy theories, they have these epistemic defects we have to discuss. I hope I answered your question.
Now we have a question from one of the many Daniels at this conference, Daniel Minkin. Thank you, very interesting discussion, but I disagree with your claim that epistemic rationality determines an actor's goals. Because the goal in the context of epistemic rationality is already determined, the goal is truth. This is more of a comment, but perhaps you can respond to it. And then part two, but Goldman's reliabilism of epistemic justification can be interpreted as an externalist theory of rationality insofar as being epistemically justified is the same as being epistemically rational. Would you agree with that? So a two-part question.
Okay, thank you for both your questions. They are great. Well, let me answer the first one. I understand, of course, that the goal of epistemic rationality is determined already, and that is the truth, but I meant it in a different way. Sometimes when we want something, it is not based just on our sentiments, it is not based on our passions or something like Hume would presume. I believe that sometimes our goals are determined by reason itself. This is the reason. This is why I talk about epistemic rationality that can determine agents' goals. Well, if I wouldn't believe in this, I'd be a sentimentalist in the area of epistemology, and I am not. I hope I made myself a bit more clear. Well, and about the second question about Goldman's reliabilism, I would say that I agree completely, because I'm a sympathizer of his reliabilism, and I'm also a sympathizer of externalist theory of justification. I would say justification, not rationality. So I do not have a problem with that. I agree. Thank you.
Sorry, my mic decided to not unmute there, so I was floundering about trying to speak and no one could hear me. I've got what might be a cute example here, and I'm not actually entirely sure whether I think there's anything to it or not, but I'm wondering whether there's a form of instrumental irrationality. And the reason why I bring this up is there's the Mel Gibson film Conspiracy Theory, which is about a paranoiac who believes the world is out to get him. And so he acts in such a way to prevent the conspirators from ever being able to harm him. And it turns out he's accidentally right. He's the paranoid who turned out to be enemies nonetheless. So he acts in such a way that he is acting irrationally. He's got no good grounds to believe there's a conspiracy against him. It just turns out there is a conspiracy against him, and it's so well kept, he could never find out about it. But he acts in such a way that he's able to then counteract said conspiracy. So maybe we can't have instrumental rationality in this sense, but could it be the case that you could be irrational and yet that ends up being instrumental to developing accidentally good beliefs about the world?
Excellent. Thank you for this. I think that your example is a nice illustration of the reason why truth is not enough. And we understand that, all of us, I believe, because when you are right by accident, that's not enough to say that you're rational. Again, you need a justification for your beliefs, because real knowledge is based on not only true, but also justified beliefs. And in your case, Mel Gibson's character just doesn't have a correct justification. He is, as you said, right by accident.
Yeah, so actually, now I think about it, it is just a case of epistemic luck, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. That's the probably that.
Yeah, so basically Mel Gibson's conspiracy theory is the Gettier case of conspiracy theory.
Yeah, something like that. He's not rational, he's just a lucky guy.